It was a typical evening, one of those nights when everything felt too normal, too mundane. I was sprawled out on the bed, mindlessly flicking through the news on my tablet, the noise of yet another podcast about diets buzzing in the background. I had never been into these shows, but for some reason, Kate had become obsessed with them lately. She listened to them religiously, and after a while, it seemed like there was no escaping them. At first, I thought it was just a passing phase, but as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that this new interest was taking up more of her time than I realized. And while I never really cared about her podcasts, I did notice the small changes in her that accompanied this new obsession. She would sit for hours, earbuds and listening intently. At dinner, instead of engaging in conversation like we used to, she would often zone out, lost in thoughts that I couldn't penetrate. She was becoming more distant, quieter than usual. Even at night, when we should have been relaxing together, she'd be on her phone, scrolling through articles or commenting on discussions and forums. It was as if there was a barrier between us that I couldn't get past, and it was only growing thicker as time went on. But tonight, it wasn't the podcast that caught my attention. It was Kate herself. She entered the bedroom with a strange energy, her steps hesitant yet determined, as though she was walking towards something important but wasn't entirely sure if it was the right thing to do. I could tell immediately that something was off. She was wearing the same casual clothes she'd worn for the last few days, but tonight, even her outfit seemed different, more purposeful, almost as if she had deliberately chosen it. Her expression was one I hadn't seen before, a mixture of uncertainty and resolve. She had something to say, I could tell, but she was clearly anxious about it, which only made me more curious. This wasn't her usual self-assured demeanor. "Michael," she began, her voice softer than usual, almost fragile. "I've been thinking a lot about us." She paused, a flicker of hesitation crossing her face before she continued. "I heard a podcast the other day about relationships, and it suggested that couples who really want to grow together should completely abstain from sex. No intimacy at all." I blinked, certain that I hadn't heard her correctly. For a split second, I thought she was joking, trying to make light of something, but then I saw the sincerity in her eyes. I quickly realized that she wasn't kidding. She was dead serious, and my heart sank at the thought. "Wait, hold on," I said, sitting up on the bed, my mind spinning. "Are you saying you want us to not have sex at all?" Kate nodded, and I could see the uncertainty in her eyes, but there was also something else, something resolute, almost as if she had already made up her mind. Her usual warmth and spontaneity were gone, replaced by this strange formality that felt foreign to me. She looked at me like she was waiting for me to understand something, some deeper truth she had uncovered and was now trying to share. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady, but I could hear the faint tremor beneath it. "I think it might help us. It's supposed to create a deeper connection, one that doesn't rely on physical things. You know, intimacy that goes beyond just the physical part of a relationship." I didn't know how to react. My mind was racing, scrambling for any sense of logic or meaning behind what she was saying. This was Kate, the woman who had always embraced our physical connection, who had once told me how much it meant to her. We had built our relationship on shared experiences, emotionally, mentally, and yes, physically. To hear her speak of abstaining from something that had always been a natural and important part of our marriage was like hearing her speak a foreign language. "Kate," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, "this doesn't make sense. You're talking about a complete shift in everything we've ever known. Is this really what you want?" Her eyes softened for a moment, and I saw a flicker of vulnerability, but she quickly masked it, the resolve creeping back into her expression. "I think it's what I need," she said softly, almost to herself. "I've been reading a lot, listening to podcasts, and I feel like this could help us. Help me too." I stared at her, unable to process the weight of her words. She was talking about a new kind of intimacy, one that existed outside the physical realm. And while I could understand the appeal of exploring emotional and intellectual connections, the idea of removing sex entirely felt like an enormous step. It wasn't just the act of sex. It was the intimacy, the closeness, the physicality that bound us together. Could we really just strip that away? Could we really rebuild our marriage on something so abstract? I felt a pang in my chest, a growing discomfort that I couldn't shake. This conversation was unlike any we'd ever had before. It was as though Kate had stepped into a new world, one I wasn't a part of, and I didn't know how to follow her. I couldn't understand why she felt the need to distance herself from me in this way. Kate, I started, but I didn't know how to finish. The words didn't seem to matter. The truth was I didn't know what to say. My mind was a whirlwind, and all I could do was stare at her, hoping for some kind of explanation that would make sense of this. But there was none. She had made her choice, and I was left to figure out where I stood. The days following that conversation were a blur. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something deeper was happening, something I wasn't privy to. Kate's new mindset, her insistence on an intimacy-free relationship, had shaken me to my core, but it wasn't just her words that haunted me. It was her behavior. She had always been a passionate person, someone who wore her heart on her sleeve. When something mattered to her, you could see it in the way she spoke, the way she moved. But now, there was something colder in her demeanor, more reserved. The sparkle I once saw in her eyes seemed dimmed, as if her mind had drifted to places I couldn't reach. And it wasn't just that. She had changed in more subtle, insidious ways. At first, I tried to be understanding. After all, relationships go through phases, and maybe this was just one of those times. Perhaps it was a phase she was going through, something she needed to work out on her own. But as the days stretched on, it became increasingly difficult to ignore the changes. She was withdrawing from me, emotionally and physically, in ways that I couldn't ignore. She started spending more time on her own, retreating into the study to listen to her podcasts or read articles about women's independence. I noticed that the things she used to care about, cooking dinner together, evening walks, just spending time with me, started to fade into the background. And it wasn't just the time she spent in solitude. It was the way she dressed. Kate had always been a jeans and t-shirt kind of girl at home. But now, even when she was just lounging around the house, she wore tailored outfits, clothes that were far too stylish for someone who was just relaxing in the comfort of their own home. She started wearing makeup more frequently, even when she had no intention of going anywhere. It was subtle at first, a light touch of lipstick here, a new pair of earrings there, but felt different, almost like she was preparing for something or someone outside our home. The most unsettling change was how she began taking long, late-night calls. I couldn't help but notice the hushed conversations, the way she'd step into the other room, her voice lowering to a whisper as if she didn't want me to overhear. Of course, I didn't eavesdrop, but the secrecy was undeniable. I told myself it was nothing, just business or something related to her new interests. But there was an undercurrent of unease in the way she would quickly hang up whenever I entered the room. And the more she became withdrawn, the more suspicious I became. One night, after she'd been on one of her late calls, I found myself standing in the hallway, unsure if I should confront her or just let it go. But I couldn't ignore the gut feeling gnawing at me, so I did what I should have done weeks ago. I checked her tablet. I didn't expect to find anything. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but when I unlocked it and began scrolling through her browser history, I felt a sinking sensation in my stomach. Among the usual links to podcasts and articles, there were messages, private messages, on a closed online forum. The posts were mostly about women's empowerment and the idea of rejecting intimacy in relationships. But one thread stood out, one that Kate had actively participated in. The users discussed rejecting all forms of intimacy with men, encouraging each other to break free from male dominance. As I read through it, I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a podcast she was into anymore. This was something deeper, something she was emotionally invested in. Kate had joined a community that seemed to champion the idea of removing men from her life entirely. The messages were filled with praise for Kate's contributions, particularly from one user named Brianna. The praise was intimate. It wasn't just about Kate's ideas on relationships or the podcast discussion she shared. Brianna's messages had a personal tone, one that made me feel like an outsider, like I was intruding on something private, something that wasn't meant for me. My heart started pounding in my chest as I scrolled further. Brianna's messages were affectionate, calling Kate brave and inspiring. They spoke about meeting in person, about the changes Kate was making in her life. There was even mention of plans to travel together, though the details were vague. But what caught my attention the most was how Kate responded to Brianna. It was different from how she spoke to anyone else, including me. There was a warmth there, an intimacy that I hadn't seen in her words for a long time. Suddenly, everything started to make sense, or rather, everything began to fall apart. Kate wasn't just rethinking our marriage. She was reinventing herself entirely. She wasn't just distancing herself from me. She was building a new life without me. And Brianna was at the center of it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was no longer part of Kate's world. Her physical withdrawal from me, her emotional detachment, and now this online relationship. These weren't signs of a woman seeking balance in her marriage. They were signs of someone planning to leave it all behind. I didn't know what to do with the information I had just uncovered. I felt like a stranger in my own home. Kate, the woman I thought I knew, had disappeared, replaced by someone else, someone I didn't recognize. And now, it seemed that someone else was filling the void she had left behind. I had to confront her. I couldn't go on pretending like everything was fine when I knew deep down it wasn't. But how could I even begin to bring this up? How could I tell her that I knew about Brianna, that I had seen everything she had been hiding? The thought of confronting her scared me. But more than that, it made me feel betrayed. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Kate had changed in ways I couldn't ignore, and now I had uncovered something that confirmed my growing suspicions. It wasn't just the podcast, the late-night calls, or the way she had started dressing and acting differently. It was Brianna. Brianna wasn't just someone Kate had met online. Brianna was becoming her new focus, her new source of connection. Everything in me screamed that something was going on between them, something beyond just ideas and philosophical discussions about relationships. The way Brianna spoke to Kate, the affection in her words. There was more to this than what I was willing to admit to myself. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind was a tornado of thoughts, swirling around the discoveries I'd made and the fear gnawing at my insides. I kept thinking about the things Kate had said, the way she had insisted that intimacy was something we didn't need. But what if that wasn't the whole truth? What if this was just a cover for something else? Something she wasn't ready to tell me, but was already living in her heart. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know more. I had to confront Kate. I couldn't let this go on any longer, pretending that everything was fine when I was certain it wasn't. So I did something I'd never done before. I followed her. Kate had told me she was going to yoga at her friend's house. She had been spending a lot of time with that group lately, another thing that had raised my suspicions. She always came back more energized, more self-assured, as if she was learning something about herself that I wasn't a part of. But today, something fell off. I had no real reason to doubt her, except that every instinct I had was telling me something wasn't right. I kept my distance as I followed her down the street. The cool morning air felt heavier than usual, and my heart pounded in my chest as I watched her walk briskly ahead. But as I turned the corner, something I never expected happened. Kate didn't go to her usual spot. She didn't head to the familiar house where her friends met for yoga. Instead, she walked straight to a car that was parked on the side of the road. And she wasn't alone. A woman I had never seen before was waiting for her. They exchanged a few words, too low for me to hear, but there was no mistaking the way Kate smiled at her. It was the same smile she used to give me, the smile that always made me feel like I was the only one in the world. But now it wasn't for me. It was for this woman. I felt my stomach twist painfully as I watched them get into the car together, Kate's hand resting gently on the woman's arm. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had suspected something for a while now, but this was confirmation. Kate was leaving me for someone else, someone I didn't even know. I felt a wave of betrayal, anger, and confusion wash over me. All of the signs, her emotional distance, the secrecy, the late-night calls, Brianna, had been pointing to this, but seeing it with my own eyes, seeing Kate so intimately engaged with someone else, shattered me in a way I couldn't describe. I didn't follow them any longer. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and walked back to the house, my mind reeling with the weight of everything I had just witnessed. My heart felt heavy in my chest, like it was being crushed under a weight I couldn't escape. The woman I had loved for so long, the woman I thought I knew, was gone. In her place was someone who had made a choice that didn't include me. The house felt empty when I returned. The silence was suffocating. I walked into the living room and stared at the empty space, my thoughts tangled in a mess of disbelief. I had always been the one to reassure Kate, the one who believed that everything would work out, no matter how tough things got. But now it felt like I had no footing left to stand on. The ground beneath me had shifted, and I was left trying to catch my balance in a world that no longer made sense. That afternoon, I found myself pacing the house, feeling trapped in my own thoughts. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Part of me wanted to confront Kate, to demand the truth from her, to scream at her for the lies, for the betrayal. Another part of me wanted to just disappear, to leave this house and never look back. I had built a life with Kate, a life that felt like it was slowly crumbling around me. As the hours passed, the decision became clearer. I couldn't go on pretending that things were fine. I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I knew what I had to do, even if it terrified me. I had to confront Kate. I had to face whatever truth she had been hiding from me, no matter how much it hurt. So, when she walked in that evening, her face lighting up as she saw me sitting there, I didn't greet her with a smile. I didn't try to be understanding or patient. Instead, I simply stood up, my hands shaking slightly, and looked her in the eye. "We need to talk," I said, my voice tight with the emotions I was trying to keep in check. "Now." Kate looked taken aback, her brows furrowing in confusion. But I could see the flicker of guilt in her eyes, the same guilt I had seen before, only now it was undeniable. She knew what I had discovered. She knew that I was no longer in the dark. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. "I know about Brianna," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I know what's been going on." The silence that followed was deafening, and in that moment, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The silence between us hung heavy in the air, thicker than I could have imagined. Kate stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock, her lips parted as if she had been caught in the middle of a confession she hadn't yet uttered. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, that she might try to explain away what I had uncovered. But she didn't. She just stood there, staring at me, her expression unreadable. The guilt in her eyes was undeniable, and in that instant, I knew everything I needed to know. I didn't want to feel this angry. I didn't want to be the kind of person who confronted their spouse in such a cold, accusatory way. But I was beyond that now. I was tired of the lies, the evasions, the secrecy. I was tired of feeling like a stranger in my own marriage, a stranger in my own home. "Kate," I said, my voice quieter but no less forceful. "How long has this been going on?" She didn't immediately respond, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them in front of her. I watched her, waiting for the truth, for her to admit what I already knew. But instead of giving me a direct answer, she exhaled a shaky breath and sat down on the edge of the couch, avoiding my gaze. Michael," she began, her voice faltering at the start. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want it to come to this." I clenched my fists at my sides. "Didn't want to hurt me?" I could barely contain the bitterness in my tone. "You've been hurting me for months, Kate. Every day. But you've been too busy with your new life to see it, haven't you?" She flinched at the words, but I couldn't stop. The frustration that had been building up inside me for weeks, months even, finally spilled out. "You've been pulling away, acting like I'm the problem, but all along, you were planning this. You were going behind my back, making decisions about our marriage without even consulting me. You've been lying to me, Kate. You've been lying to me for God knows how long." Her eyes flickered with something, regret, maybe, or guilt, but it wasn't enough. She had crossed the line. And now, no matter what she said, the damage was done. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice strained. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to explain that I was changing, that I was becoming someone else. I thought this was the only way to find myself again." "You don't find yourself by pushing the people who love you away," I retorted, my frustration turning to anger. You don't find yourself by running into the arms of someone else. You find yourself by being honest, by confronting the issues in your life, not by hiding them in some online community or with a woman you barely know. She bit her lip, tears welling in her eyes as she looked up at me. I didn't want to hurt you, Michael, but I had to do this for myself. I had to explore who I really am outside of everything we built together. I can't be the person I was. Not anymore. I can't go back. Her words hit me harder than I anticipated, the finality of them taking the breath out of my chest. I wanted to shout, to tell her how selfish she was being, how everything we had built together was now crumbling because she couldn't be honest with me. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stood there, my hands clenched in a fist at my sides, feeling the weight of her decision like a crushing weight on my shoulders. I've been to a therapist, she continued, almost as if trying to justify her actions. I've tried to figure this out, but the truth is, I've outgrown this marriage. I've outgrown you, Michael. I need to find something else. Something different. I can't be in a relationship like this anymore. Her words stung, cutting through me like a knife. Outgrown me? Outgrown our marriage? The woman I had spent years with, the woman I thought I knew, had made up her mind. She had decided that I was no longer the person she wanted to be with. She had chosen this path, and I wasn't a part of it. I tried to speak, but my throat felt tight. I didn't know what to say. I had hoped for some kind of revelation, some kind of moment where we could both come to an understanding and try to fix this. But this wasn't a relationship I recognized anymore. This was a goodbye, wrapped up in the form of a conversation I never thought I'd have. What are you asking me to do, Kate? I said finally, my voice strained. Are you asking me to just accept this? To let you go without a fight? Because I can't do that. I won't. I'm not asking you to accept it, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm asking you to understand that this is what I need. This is who I am now. I stared at her, and for a moment, the anger, the hurt, the disbelief all melted away. It wasn't just that Kate had changed. It was that she had already decided. She had made her choice, and now she was asking me to let her go. I wanted to fight for her. I wanted to tell her that we could work through this, that we could fix what had broken between us. But deep down, I knew I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. She was already gone, emotionally, mentally, and now, physically, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I can't do this, I said, my voice barely audible. If you've already made up your mind, then I have to go. Kate's face softened, but she didn't try to stop me. She didn't beg me to stay. She just nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'm sorry, she said again, her voice breaking. I turned away, unable to look at her anymore. The house felt smaller, the walls closing in on me as I walked out the door, leaving behind the life I had once thought I understood. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what came next. But what I did know was that I couldn't stay in a marriage that was already over. And so, I packed my things, walked out of that house, and left Kate to her new life. Days passed after I left the house, but the emotional weight of that decision never seemed to lighten. I tried to keep myself busy, finding solace in the work I had put off for months, meeting with friends I had neglected, but nothing could drown out the constant thought of Kate. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the fact that she had already moved on. She had made her choice, and I had no place in her life anymore. In the midst of my turmoil, I received a call from a mutual friend, a distant acquaintance who had heard about the split and wanted to check in. I told him I was fine. Well, as fine as one could be after the dissolution of their marriage. But there was something in his voice that caught my attention when he mentioned Kate. I saw her the other day, Mike, he said, his tone casual but laced with curiosity. She was with a woman, someone you might want to know about. Brianna. I felt a sudden rush of nausea. I had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it all feel too real. I asked for details, but the conversation quickly shifted away from the subject, as if my friend was trying to spare me more pain. But the damage had already been done. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I found myself driving to a small cafe, a place I used to frequent with Kate. It was a quiet spot, tucked away from the noise of the city, where we had shared so many conversations over coffee. But now it felt foreign. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe closure, maybe just a glimpse of the person Kate had become. I wasn't expecting answers, but I had to see for myself. When I arrived, I spotted her immediately. She was sitting at a table by the window, laughing softly at something the woman across from her had said. Brianna. I recognized her instantly. She was taller than Kate, with dark hair and sharp features, the kind of woman who exuded confidence in a way that seemed to radiate off her. They were sitting close, their arms brushing occasionally, a shared intimacy that felt both private and public at the same time. I stood there for a long moment, watching them from across the room. I felt an odd sense of detachment, as though I were witnessing a scene that no longer had anything to do with me. Kate was no longer the woman I had married. She wasn't even the woman I had known. She was someone new, someone I couldn't recognize, and yet I couldn't look away. I sat at a table in the corner, quietly watching them. I didn't want to disturb anything. I wasn't even sure what I wanted from this encounter. But as the conversation between Kate and Brianna continued, snippets of their words reached me, and I couldn't help but listen. I'm so glad you're in my life, Kate, Brianna said, her voice warm with affection. You've really opened my eyes. I can't wait to see where this goes. Kate's response was softer, but I could hear the tenderness in her voice. I never thought I could feel this way about someone again. It feels right. The words hit me harder than I expected. There it was, the confirmation of everything I had feared. Kate wasn't just emotionally detached from me. She was in love with Brianna, and that love was real, not some fleeting infatuation. It wasn't just a phase. It was the new reality she had embraced. I felt my chest tighten as I absorbed the weight of her words. The woman I had spent years with, the woman I had loved and built a life with was gone. And in her place was someone I didn't know, someone I would never know. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, to scream and ask why she couldn't just have been honest with me from the beginning. But I didn't. I stayed in my seat, silent, as I watched Kate smile at Brianna, the kind of smile I used to see when she looked at me. That smile was no longer mine, and I wasn't sure when that shift had happened, but it had. After a while, I stood up and quietly left the cafe. My heart felt heavy, but there was a sense of finality in the air, like a door closing that had been ajar for far too long. I didn't look back as I walked out into the street, feeling the cold wind hit my face. It was over. Kate had made her choice, and I had made mine. Within days, I filed for divorce. It was a painful process, but I knew it was the right thing to do. The life we had shared, the marriage we had built, was no longer something I could hold on to. I had to let go of Kate, of the life I thought we would have, and of the future I had once dreamed of. As for Kate, she tried to contact me a few times after that. I ignored her calls and messages. She wanted to explain, to make things right, but I wasn't interested in hearing her side anymore. I had made my choice, and she had made hers. There was no going back. I moved to another state, trying to put the past behind me. It wasn't easy. There were days when the loneliness felt unbearable, when the memories of what we had together threatened to overwhelm me. But slowly I began to rebuild. I found new routines, new friendships, and a new sense of self that I hadn't realized I had lost in the years of trying to save my marriage. Kate, I heard, went on to build a life with Brianna. She had found the intimacy she had been searching for, only it wasn't with me. It wasn't what I had hoped for, but it was her truth, and I had to accept it. In the end, we had both chosen our paths. Kate had chosen a future without me, and I had chosen a future where I could find peace again. It was painful, yes, but it was also liberating. I had learned that sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward. And as I moved forward, I realized that the only person I could truly depend on was myself.